Hello and welcome to Saunders on Security, brought to you by Corinium Global Intelligence, the podcast for the busy CISO where we talk everything security. And I'm very happy today to be joined by Ahmed Nabil, and we're going to be chatting about digital information and cloud migrations and all that kind of stuff. Ahmed, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do?
Thanks a lot, Ross. Thanks a lot for having me. I like this kind of interviews and podcasts just to share experience and gain some experience and learn. That's how the community works. So
Absolutely.
my name is Ahmed. I'm from Egypt, living in Dubai, UAE now, working for an international financial institution. I have two girls, one boy, a cat, and a dog. It's a different mix. Um, I've been working in the field of technology, IT, and security for the last 20 years. Hopefully, I don't look that old when the people see the video. Yeah. And you can imagine for the last 20 years, I've worked at everything related to IT, and then security, and recently cloud, where I find it a very challenging space. My main focus is security, managing countries, driving their security, ensuring, in a nutshell, that they're secure, as you can see.
Hmm. Yeah, no, you talk about the cloud and things like that. I think it's evolved so much in the last year, and we've had a couple of conversations at different conferences and things like that about the cloud,
True.
and I think we're going to hit on that today. And I think that's perhaps where we're going to start kicking off as well. So, I mean, you say you're dealing with security and privacy on a day-to-day basis. Uh,
Yeah.
you and I have spoken about the changes that COVID and everything has prompted us with before. How have you seen the adoption of the cloud progressing in, say, the last year and a half?
Yeah. So first of all, yeah, we really hope this pandemic, because I believe it will end at one point. Hopefully, everyone will be safe. So as you mentioned, this pandemic or the COVID really proved to us that companies, organization that were ready to leverage cloud resources more than their competitors, more than their peers, were able to survive, and they have been in a much less exposure to risk.
Mm.
Cloud, everyone is dealing with the cloud as if it's the big threat to security and all those kind of things. And I always, since you mentioned the events and all this kind of thing, I always mention that the cloud is a real opportunity for us to enhance. So priorities for organizations during the COVID, and we always mention this funny thing, it was the main driver for the digital transformation. So priorities shifted to cloud migration. A lot of companies just fast tracked the migrations. Most of the companies were already on the go for the cloud. However, they maybe just put it on the fast track or the fast path, and the result is a lot of migrations to the cloud, a lot of consulting, a lot of companies. The whole market was leveraging the cloud, and I think everyone is following up. Most of the cloud companies were the real winners, gainers when it comes to the market revenues and all this kind of thing in the cloud. So when you think about the enterprises, I don't think post-COVID or after COVID or this is kind of a surge. I mean, there will be continuing to this momentum of the cloud. However, the our main focus will change, or the priorities again will shift. So during the COVID, it was mainly about the lift and shift and moving to
Yeah.
the cloud and migrating to the cloud. So once now the pandemic and the COVID has been lasting for a year now or more than a year. So most of the migrations are done, and most of the effort for this shift and lift is done. However, due to the complexity and the nature of the cloud, and these workloads have moved, and remember, they moved on a very fast pace. There's still momentum to tweak a lot of things to ensure that once the applications and their workloads are stabilized on the cloud, we need to ensure that they are stabilized in a correct way, in a correct fashion. So the full focus will move from this lift and shift to the modernization, to the stability, to the modification, to the advantage.
Yeah.
Also, there's no doubt that during this pandemic and during this move, and since we mentioned it was fast track thing, there might be some mistakes. Uh,
Yes,
and
indeed.
Exactly, and I guess you and I and a lot of ones will pass by this. So we need to focus on fixing these mistakes. Things that were oversight during the migration need to be done. Changes in business that were sometimes unthinkable. And because I heard this story that, I mean, the cloud now will be declining, we need to remember that we as a security people or as an IT technology, we gave the business something they never heard. So think about 5 years back, if someone just asked you, we need to maybe have this kind of project or build this kind of solution. Yes, this might take 3-4 months. Give me this budget, allocate these people, these resources. We've done complete migrations in days. So business now, and this is the big challenge, business now are thinking everything happened over the night. And this happened worldwide, and they will be expecting this. Is a brutal change in the culture because the cloud allowed us to do a lot of business in a kind of very fast fashion. So this is another challenge on going forward again with the cloud.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a couple of things there that I want to touch on that are vitally important, I think, to this. And the first was right at the beginning. You said, companies who were ready, it kind of gave them that competitive advantage. And I think that's a very pertinent thing to say, because we've seen a lot of companies move into the cloud a lot smoother if they were already on that journey. I know I worked with a couple of clients that when lockdowns hit and things like that, it was barely a speed bump for them because they were already in the cloud and quite comfortable, and it really worked for them. And they actually got ahead because they suddenly had 3 weeks where they just continued as usual while others were catching up and competitors were catching up. I think the other thing that you mentioned that I just want to touch on as well is that how we did that lift and shift in a couple of days. And, I see that, and I saw it before COVID as well, is there are serious challenges in lift and shift because, you suddenly, in a lot of cases, don't have that physical sort of security platform. If you perhaps had in-house servers that didn't need to be firewalled from the outside anymore, that you've lifted and shifted up into the cloud, suddenly ports are open that you didn't expect. And I think that talks to the complexities and the changes and the tweaks and stuff. With this migration to the cloud, where do you think we are standing as far as security is concerned right now?
So yes, first of all, the companies and organizations that were really ready were able to do this. We gave the good example, but again, to be honest, I witnessed, and I guess everyone is aware of several companies that were not able to compete. They were not able to do the right thing and do this lift and shift. And unfortunately, the COVID and this pandemic was really a big hit for them. So when we think about the cloud for security, I mean, there's a lot of things for us. Again, I always say, yes, there's some risk, there's this known risks and all these kind of things. But I mean, people are just focusing on this while they're not thinking about the cloud as a real opportunity to solve a long-standing issues that have been in the IT for a long time. Think of a simple thing, MFA, for example, the multi-factor authentication.
Yeah.
4 or 5 years back or more, to do this without the cloud and to get the tokens and do the setup of the infrastructure, it's not days, it's months, a lot of hours and resources to be done. This is just a couple of clicks now and you have the MFA up and running. So I think the cloud is an opportunity to rethink, not about just the IT and the availability and the recovery and business continuity and all these kind of nice things in the operations, but also about the security. Can we do it differently? And this is the core when I think of it. Can we do it differently? And actually, it's not just differently, but actually in a much, much better fashion. Yes, we need to understand this. We have a legacy security problems. We have a long standing issues that we were not able to solve. Think about again the old applications that were not modernized. Think about all the applications that were not synced to a single sign-on or coupled to any identity, and they were running on a kind of local things. And then modernizing these apps using things like SAML, single sign-on, and then connecting them to the cloud. This is a huge step in your security.
Yeah.
When you think about this, it's not about when you think about the cloud, to be honest, we're all saying, yeah, the cloud is very scary. You're storing your stuff in another computer, all these kind of things. But when you really think about the cloud, it's not about the cloud being hacked. Unfortunately, there might be some incidents, of course, but unfortunately, most of the attacks that's happening, it's about misconfiguration from you. It's about using a weak password. It's about not applying MFA. It's about the permission, again, misconfigured systems. So this is not cloud technology problem, but it's unfortunately you're still existing old problems that you're taking it down from the on-prem to the cloud.
Yeah.
So these are the things, and the cloud, what's really offering us is an opportunity to leverage new technology to solve these issues. Think about the passwords, for example, applying the MFA or the passwordless, or all these tools that check the password and whether you've used this password several times and checking it if it's a kind of this list of password or not. Think about the misconfigured systems. Now, if you're getting a cloud solution, especially if it's a SaaS solution, so someone configured it 100%, and now you're on top of this, maybe for the data and some other settings and configurations that need to be done. There's a lot of security checks that you can leverage as well in the cloud to ensure that your systems are patched, are not vulnerable. The ones that you mentioned now, for example, to check if you have any port is open, for example, on a firewall or not, and advise you on this. So a lot of things happen. You've got, for example, the encryption, which again was, when you talk about security professionals, PKI and certificates were a real nightmare for them. Now the encryption much easier. Role-based controls, data sovereignty, and ensuring the location of data, how you protect your data. And then coupled with that sovereignty, you're gonna find the compliance. Think about the business continuity. Again, one of the hardest thing to be done in the old-fashioned renting another data center, ensuring, for example, whether you want to have it a heat or warm or cold site. Now you can have full business continuity in a different continent. All these are opportunities that are open for us as security professionals in the cloud, to be honest.
Yeah, that's so true. I think that's the thing that people often don't see in risk is the other side of the coin of risk is opportunity.
Exactly.
Yeah, very, very valid there. Now, and you talk about configuration, the amount of times that we read that someone's S3 bucket was accessible or an Azure blob was open or something like that.
True.
Silly things that can just be configured. So, do you see that there's any sort of kind of data or systems or anything that's most at risk or most sought after if a hacker is coming after it, if like some dude with a hoodie sitting in a basement somewhere, as the media always portrays them to be? What's sought after?
So when you think about the data, I think again data is the main, if not the top concern for security professionals, CISOs, anyone moving to the cloud, because now a lot of the plumbing, a lot of the infrastructure, all the things are now taken care of by someone else. Now you'll be focusing mainly about your users and the data on top of it. So yes, there's some data might be at risk because most companies now operate under regulations. There's some regulatory controls, especially maybe for highly regulated industries like the pharma and the banking, all those kind of things. So there's some regulations, and the regulators now are allowing you in a very careful and wise steps to move to the cloud, giving some conditions. So we are under some regulatory control information, whether it's HIPAA, whether it's PCI, name whatever the regulatory that you're for it. So there might be some regulations on this data. There might be some industry, governmental thing, and under these regulations and these mandates, very important that we as security professionals, companies need to understand where is their data, where this data resides. This is some of the things that can be sought over. Think about the GDPR, think about these regulations. And if something, for example, is supposed to be in Europe and now it's in America or vice versa, all this kind of thing. Or maybe there's a regulation to have your data, for example, in the Middle East or Africa. And for example, you have your business continuity, maybe it's not known where you configure it, or the DR, throwing your data, for example, in US or Europe. So this is the thing that might be a risk. This thing that's sort of, so I've witnessed this several times. People focus mainly on the data and they forget something. There's backup, there's some kind of disaster recovery. And this recovery, where is the location? Where is it located? So we need to understand where is the data, who has the access in it, how it's protected. Are we using encryption? what level of encryption. Is the encryption only during transient or only during storage and on processing? What kind of keys? Are we using our own keys, HSMs, or we are relying on the provider? These are kind of things that are sort of, these are kind of things that might be missed. Another thing that we, when it comes to data and what's the main risk with the data is the contracts. Normally you're going to have some kind of contracts, and these contracts maybe will restrict the data and how it should be consumed or used. So we need to think about these contracts. We need to understand some contracts, we need some kind of authorization before this data goes to the cloud or before this data is used on the cloud. And if these contracts are violated or if there's any breach, then there might be some penalties, some fines, some bad negative effect. What about also the contracts with the cloud provider? This is something also over some people just miss this. Sometimes the cloud provider itself has some agreements and contracts with some third party to share this data with third party, maybe for some processing or some visualization. So what about this? What about the partners you're connected to? All of this should be part of the equation when you think about the data, which is the main asset, to be honest, when you're going to the cloud. All the protection, all the foresight for you need to be on this data.
Yeah, you bring up such valid points there. So you speak about privacy and you know, there's those regulations, and it's interesting because you're right. I see it two ways when I deal with companies. Often that they'll, if data is concerned, it's an either or kind of thing where it's, oh, we're only worried about the regulation, or we're only worried about what's in our NDA and contract. It's not a case of, you know, combine it. It's an ecosystem, and it is that sharing agreements. It's stuff going overseas, and the backups, very rightly put, that's something that happens. So companies put backups in another region because, oh, that's what you should do, but you could break the law in doing so.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what kind of protection strategies do you see coming out of all of this now? I mean, you mentioned MFA. You mentioned taking those contracts into account. What sort of strategies and protections and securities are there that companies can start putting in place or should have in place?
Yeah, so in general, if you would like to summarize this in a couple of steps, first we need to identify where's our data. And when we identify our data, we need to identify where's our restricted or where's our regulated data versus our typical normal data. So again, when it comes to the cloud and putting some data some other hands, the greatest risk here will be the penalties, the reputation, the fines, the contract violations that might happen, or maybe the loss of intellectual property if you have some intellectual property data. So we need to focus on finding our data, classification of data. So think about the data lifecycle and the classification that need to be done. And based on this classification, will be some protections. Based on this classification, need to treat maybe the sensitive data or the confidential data in a different manner, a different way than what you're doing with your public data. So we need to treat it from a protection perspective and also from a monitoring perspective. And this is one of the good things about the cloud. The cloud really allows you now, with all the monitoring tools, to really check all the blind spots that have been before in your organization and you're not being aware of. So with the monitoring, which is the second step, so identify your data, the first, classify it, and then ensure that it's purely monitored. Think about things that happen also in the on-premise, which is about the shadow IT. The problem with the cloud is that anyone now, any user, any employee normally will go and maybe start consuming one of the cloud services. Typically, back in the old days, this would be very difficult to be spotted. And typically, they will not ask the IT or come to a security person because we normally complicate things for them. We ask for approvals on this kind of thing.
As you say no.
Yeah, that's the problem. So, I mean, and that's also a change that we need as security professionals and CISOs to change this. So we need, with the tools coming with the cloud, which one of them, for example, the CASB, the broker, this is one of the important tools. Now we have some kind of visibility if anyone is consuming or checking any other cloud service. So third point, start leveraging the cloud tools. Don't think and move with your mindset and whatever you were doing on-prem to the cloud. There's a lot of tools that you can leverage, things like the CASB, the CSPM, the CWP for the protection workloads or for your posture management. These are things that you need to think about. And then another point would be auditing your infrastructure, auditing your configuration. Remember, configuration is still one of you. You mentioned things about Amazon buckets, and that's true. There's been a huge attack, I think, 1.5 years ago, where a lot of payment data have been breached and things. It turned out to be that it was an Amazon cloud service. That wasn't actually the fault of this because it was a misconfigured WAF. So they took a WAF from Amazon and they misconfigured it. If you remember, this was the Capital One breach. So it was a misconfiguration. So you need every time to audit your configuration, check your configuration. There's dozens of critical things which can create an exploitable weakness if it's misconfigured. So we need to audit. And there is a lot of tools that can help you from the cloud to audit your configuration and check it. Again, this is one of the important things. The last but not least, I would think about it is the third party. Think about a good program to handle your third-party attackers. Think about what happened last December, what happened the SolarWinds thing, and who's paid victim for this? Huge companies. So no one is immune. That's something that we all need to understand. Think about third parties, how you vet these third parties, how you ensure that they onboarded properly. Do you do a risk assessment on them on a periodic basis or not? Things like zero trust. It's not because I added you once and that's it. There's a continuous verification. I always think about the famous Ronald Reagan, I think, when he said that trust but verify. So I think that's the right thing. Things like zero trust, especially with third party. So these 5 pillars are the main things, maybe, or the 5-6 pillars that you need. These should be your strategies when you're moving to the cloud.
Yeah, and I think the great part about the cloud as well is those sort of strategies are now accessible to anyone using it. You don't have to be a massive enterprise to use it. You can just do it. I see it all the time with, like you say, vetting those third parties and doing your attestations there to see that it's working. You can do that pretty well now, even as a small company. And you should be. Don't think because you're a small company that you shouldn't be doing this kind of stuff. You really should be. Great. Ahmed, we're heading up to the end of our time now. And one of the things, and you know, you've given us so many fantastic steps and nuggets to go on here. But one of the things I ask every single guest that's on here, which is something that I've got a different answer for every time, and it's quite great to ask. If you had one success factor or quick win for a CISO to implement around security and things like that, what would it be?
So that's a difficult question to be honest, because sometimes I get feedback that with the move to the cloud and all these kind of things, CISOs or security professionals tend to be more on a kind of on the sideline, for example, since the cloud services and all these kind of things are taking this portion from the CISOs. However, especially, for example, if companies adopting software as a service model, which means that the full solution is adopted, CISOs will think what I'm doing, or maybe I will not have the right job or things to do. However, we need to understand that the cloud opened a lot of doors. We have seen things like DevOps and DevSecOps, all these kind of things coming. And with these kind of things, security practices need to be embedded in all these kind of things. We need to understand these kind of things. And it only falls to the CISOs to ensure that this is there, embedded, and communicate what's needed. If we want to ensure that the CISOs, let's name it the modern CISO role, the modern CISO will be, and this was always what I believe in. The CISO's main role is to educate, advise the senior leaders, the senior stakeholders, the top management about the cloud security. What is the cloud security? And it's not an all thing about the cloud. It's a shared responsibility between us and the cloud, and what security concerns may arise. We need to ensure for the CISO, you need to build a proper the proper team with the cloud skills. You cannot survive in this world without the proper skills. So
Mm.
the world of IT passed during several revolutions. I remember back in 2008, 2009, when the virtualization started, and the resistance from at that point in time of the people, especially who don't want to change. They're still focused on the normal, typical. They were not able to understand. There's no now just server thing. Forget about this Dell and IBM and the hardware that you need to stack it yourself. You need to think a little bit on a kind of virtual layer. And now the shift came to the cloud. So without having the proper team, you will not be able to survive. As I mentioned, the DevSecOps, I'm seeing this as a high trend. And the
Mm.
people, to be honest, especially the developers, they are very hard to be controlled. And they want to focus mainly on the value, and they forget anything about the security. And then
Yeah.
we need to ensure that they adhere to all the security guidelines, to all the security recommendations, especially with the developers. Now, a lot of APIs will be exposed. A lot of architecture is changing. So now it's different animal. So what's the API security that you're performing? What's kind of architecture that you're doing here? So it's more now an advisory role and an architecture role.
Mm.
Think about the architecture. Get immersed inside the architecture, understand the cloud 100%, and how you're going to architect a solution in a secure fashion. There will be new terms, new technologies, and again, it's your responsibility at the end as CISO to protect your organization.
Yeah. So security by design and privacy by design.
Sure, exactly.
Yeah. Great. Well, Ahmed, thank you so much for joining us today. I think this has been a fantastic conversation, and I think we've got a lot of steps that we can take away from it and implement. Really, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks,
Anything you want to
Saunders. Really
say
my pleasure.
anything you want to say as a last goodbye? How do people get hold of you?
I have my contacts. I'm not sure if it's gonna be posted with the webcast. I have my blog. It's itcalls.net, and you can reach me the same on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and I'll be glad to answer any question. As I mentioned, we are all part. Unfortunately, the bad people are united and supporting each other. I think it's time for the blue teams or for the good people to unite, support each other to ensure that our community, our organizations are safe.
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, thank you for joining us, and thank you to our listeners, and we will see you next time on Saunders on Security. Until then, cheerio.
Thank you.